I heard this week that Captain Sully Sullenberger returned to flying again. And ever since the miracle on the Hudson.
The creation on the Hudson?
Yeah, you know, I've been wondering just how many people had to be in alignment for that to happen? Was it just him? And it happened so fast
what
that
part
no
are you
one else...
talking about? Are you talking about the creation where he rendezvoused perfectly with a flock of geese and performed the perfect thing that he always planned to do if that would happen?
All of it, yes. You know, was it his creation, or
many say, oh, were we ever lucky to be on an airplane with a man who was trained to do that? Mm-hmm. And we would say,
yeah, was it a plane?
You really call that luck, that you rendezvoused with someone that had put that in his vortex? Or would you rather rendezvous with a pilot who had never had a thought about an emergency landing and therefore was never in the process of attracting one?
Yeah, was his expectation enough to do it?
Little mind twisting, isn't it? Well, what do you think? In other words, do you think that stuff just happens, and when it happens, if you're really good, then you can get yourself out of it? Or do you think you create your own reality? Which is it? You can't have it both ways. In other words, and yet you flip back and forth. This audience just flipped back and forth. In other words, because when someone has been, Jerry and Esther were laughing about this because they were talking about having a plan B. And when you have a plan B, does that mean you don't really expect plan A to work? And if you don't really expect plan A to work, then are you resistant to plan A and therefore you need plan B? And if you're resistant to plan A, you're probably a little resistant to plan B, so now you've got plan C. And pretty soon you're not in a place of alignment with what you really want at all, you see. That's the point that we're making. What point were you wanting to make?
Well, you know, I was wondering, what did it take to arrange that? Was it just his expectation of being in the vortex, or was it a plane of people coming back from one of these seminars that was enough to make that kind of a miracle happen?
Well, here's the thing. Let us just ask you, because we really want to get to the heart of this. Was the miracle having a safe landing after a disaster in the sky, or was the miracle the disaster in the sky? In other words, what part of it do you want to call deliberate creating? His ability to bring that big airplane down safely after something that you don't want to call creation happened? Or do you want to call it all creation? In other words, flocks of birds are flying. They're intuitive. Do you understand that nothing happens except for the vibrational alignment and point of attraction? So
right, but
here, let us tell you another story first. Okay. It will soften it and make it easier for you, because you've been looking at that subject from an entirely different way, and now we're twisting your brain into a knot as we are talking about deliberate creation. So let us give you another sort of platform. Jerry and Esther were in Buffalo a few years ago, and they were watching the local news, and the news was showing that at the local high school they were having a week-long experiment that they did it every year, where they hauled into the football arena a whole lot of broken and bloody automobiles from crashes. And they put several of them around the field, and the entire student body was paraded through them and around them in order to see firsthand what accidents cause. And it was about drunk driving. And then as the students returned to their classroom, every few minutes a special bell would ring, an announcement would come across the loudspeaker that would say, "Will student such and such, who was just killed in an automobile crash, please report to the mortuary." And off he would go. And then those students, the students who knew him, would mourn, and his parents would write obituaries. And they were really taking this to an extreme because they wanted these children to completely feel the impact of drunk driving. And they were so proud of themselves about this presentation, and the news was proud of them. Everyone was proud of them. And as Jerry and Esther watched it, and their hearts sunk and their stomachs tied into a knot, they said, "Abraham, what is going on here?" And we said, "More of these people that are being exposed to this week long of intense focus are in a vibrational place that makes them more likely to have an automobile accident than if this had not been a subject that was exposed in this way. Because law of attraction says when you focus upon something and activate it in your vibration, it becomes a part of your point of attraction. Now, we acknowledge that this airline pilot who wants to deliver people safely, and we understand all the safety regulations and all of the practicing, but this man was more intensely involved in this sort of rescue than any pilot that you'll ever meet. He was teaching it. It was really, 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 really active in his vibration. And many would say, well, wasn't it fortunate that the man who had that most activated in his vibration was the man who had the experience so that he could get them out of it safely? And we say, but you forget he was the man who had it most activated in his vibration. In other words, the geese, or whoever they were cooperative components to the most active vibration that he had going on. When Esther first began receiving us, she had this sort of distorted view of what interacting with infinite intelligence would be about. And in the very early days, she actually thought that it was about life just going bad for most people, but some of us are lucky enough that we get to tap in to infinite intelligence to help us out of trouble. So she actually thought that we would help her to rescue people from close calls. It took her quite a while before she began to realize that we were in a vibration not where the close calls are. In other words, we're not training you to look for trouble and solve it. We're training you to be a vibrational match to the well-being that you are seeking. And there is a big vibrational difference in that, you see. So we think it is nice that those people were fortunate enough to be on an airplane with a man who knew what he was doing. We also think it is interesting that they were a vibrational match to someone who had that point of attraction going on. So now you say, well, now I don't know what to do. Do I want a pilot that's trained for trouble? And we say, you really don't. You really don't. You want a pilot who never expects any trouble, but it's not easy to be in this world and not expect some sort of trouble. And so it's a constant refining of what you are wanting. It's a constant refocusing. This is such an interesting thing where your world, for the most part, takes disasters and problems and builds monuments to them, and generation after generation points you toward the troubles that you've lived. And that is predominantly the reason that the majority of people are resistant to the well-being. It's really a funny thing. The people who are living are putting all kinds of wonderful things in this vortex of creation. And new ones, the new babies that are being born from this vibration of well-being. But as soon as they get here, they're trained by those that are sure that there are problems to be had, you see. So we're just trying to help you to find some balance. So if we were standing in your physical shoes, we would continue to say things always work out for me. And plenty of the people on that airplane said, well, it really did work out well for me because there was someone who really knew what he was doing. And we say there is something off in the vibration of anyone who has to land in the Hudson. You like the drama of it, don't you? In other words, if you all didn't like the drama of it, you would focus more upon what you want. There would be many more people talking about what they want and far fewer people talking about what they don't want, you see. And in the long run, it all works out anyway. Nothing is going terribly wrong. We're just saying you get to choose. Every one of you get to choose whether how resistant you are to your well-being and how much drama you want in the closing of the gap. In other words, someone who wants and allows and wants and allows and wants and allows and wants and allows has a very nicely unfolding, deliberate life. Someone who wants and doesn't allow, so wants and doesn't allow, and wants and doesn't allow, and then allows, has a more exciting ride, you see. Good time for a segment of refreshment.
Yes, thank you very much.